Today is lesson 14 of A Witch's Primer, and we are going to be getting into how to cast a magic circle. The text of how to cast a circle is in the handout of A Witch's Primer. So if you just register for the course at arielgatoga.com/AWP, arielgatoga.com/AWP, you'll be given a link to your lesson page, which has all the links to the different lectures, plus your handouts, plus other interesting information. It's free. There's nothing to pay. So within those handouts, you're going to find an outline of the circle as I give it. Casting a circle is a fundamental practice in magic, and especially in the craft. It's really about creating a sanctified space for our magic without needing to have a permanent temple or church or something. Any place can be purified and transformed into a holy space that's appropriate for magical work. Casting a circle involves cleansing an area, marking a boundary and sealing it, calling upon elemental forces at each direction, raising energy, sometimes even invoking deities. And when you're inside that magical sealed space, not only is it easier for you to feel safe, sanctified, and pure, but it also gives your mind a way to focus. Your energy is contained within that circle, and it tends to create more of a focus for the energy that you raise. You don't need to cast a circle for all of your daily magical practices, unless you want to. Of course, you may. Sometimes the idea of casting a circle can feel very tedious and make you not want to bother. So it's better, if that's the case, to just do the magic and save your circle casting for times when you need that special sacred space. That can be helpful when you're working with a group of people, but it can have its benefits when you're working solo as well. Casting a circle might at first seem to be a little confusing and a little intimidating, but just be patient and practice it for a while and you'll get the hang of it. A good tip for beginners is to practice casting a circle once a day until it becomes smooth and natural. For the first week or two, consider practicing it in sections before putting it all together. After a couple of weeks, try to memorize the entire process and practice it for another week. You can feel free to add your own touches to the ritual and make it your own. Let's talk first about circle etiquette if you are in a group setting before we start talking about how to actually cast the circle. If you are in a group, especially if you are a guest in a group, it's expected that everyone will be quiet and reflective before the circle is cast. This usually means avoiding jokes and arguments, noisy conversations, etc. Often a period of silence is observed prior to the ritual being performed. Once the circle has been cast, it's usually not okay to cross the boundary of the circle without asking somebody that's in charge to help you. Breaching that circle boundary is not a good idea. Obviously, if there's an emergency or something like that, you can do it. But it's also usually considered impolite to talk during the circle casting or during the ritual unless there's some sort of informal period, which is frequently during the cakes and wine or libations. People are usually sensitive about their tools. So if there's an altar set up, you don't want to just go handle the tools on the altar unless you're directed to do so, or at least ask permission before you pick up somebody's tools. It's disrespectful, and sometimes people get their dander up if you do that. Typically, ritual movements in a circle are performed sunwise. In the northern hemisphere, sunwise is clockwise. In the southern hemisphere, it's counterclockwise. The direction is known as deosil in witchcraft. It's pronounced jostle in Gaelic. Widdershins is commonly the word used in the craft to denote anti-sunwise. So in the northern hemisphere, this would be counterclockwise, and in the southern hemisphere, this would be clockwise. The person leading the ritual will typically inform you if the direction you walk in or move in the circle matters to them. In some cases, they may not be concerned at all about it. And sometimes people are very particular that you only move one direction or the other while in the circle. So if you're asked to move only clockwise, just follow the directions. If a sacred fire is involved in a ritual, it's important not to dispose of things in the sacred fire, like cigarette butts or trash or anything, actually. Putting anything into a sacred fire without asking for permission is really not a good idea. Typically, those sacred fires are consecrated, and very often they're consecrated for specific purposes, and you putting stuff in and feeding the fire on your own without asking permission can disrupt the energy of them. There are many techniques for casting circles, and I'm going to share a ritual with you that's very detailed and comprehensive. It's the whole package. However, you can also cast very simple circles on your own. You don't have to do this whole thing. For example, the orb of light exercise that we work with is a type of basic circle casting unto itself. To cast a circle very simply, you can just take your athame, your wand, or just your index finger or index and middle finger and trace a circle around your working area, imagining a bluish-white light emanating from the tip of the athame, wand, or fingers, and marking the ground around you. That's how simple casting a circle can be. If you have both of those tools, the wand and the blade, try one and then try the other and notice the difference, if any, that you experience when you're practicing your circle casting. We typically cast our circles sunwise, so that's deassemble or jostle. Sometimes we'll cast them anti-sunwise or widdershins, depending on tradition or depending on what we're doing. For instance, sometimes for working magic during the waxing moon, people will prefer to cast their circles sunwise, and during the waning moon, they will prefer to cast their circles anti-sunwise. Sometimes people will always cast their circle sunwise, and they will never cast their circle anti-sunwise, or vice versa. For our purposes here, casting everything deassemble is probably a smart and safe idea. Remember, deassemble means sunwise, and widdershin means anti-sunwise. In the northern hemisphere, deassemble is clockwise, and widdershins is counterclockwise. In the southern hemisphere, you switch those. Now, the basic steps for casting your circle are laid out in a specific sequence to maximize the desired effect. So I'm going to detail each step consecutively with you now. First, you're going to start with a grounding and centering, followed by a cleansing and purifying of the area, then an energy boundary, and then calling on the watchtowers. Then you'll raise energy, typically in the form of a cone of power. Optionally, you may want to invoke a deity if your practice involves working with deities. And then you will do your intended magical work. In group settings, this is often where libations are common. If then deities have been invoked, you thank them, and then you back out. You take everything down in the reverse order that you put it up. So you thank the deities, you lower the cone of power, you say goodbye and close the watchtowers at each direction, you banish the circle boundary, and then perform a final grounding and centering. So first, before starting, you should probably take some sort of ritual bath. And obviously, if you don't have a bath, you can do a ritual shower. It's a good idea to include some salt and maybe even some essential oil or tea of hyssop or lavender, but those are optional. During the bath, it's a good idea to reflect on your day and let it go so that you're not carrying any stress of your day into your ritual with you. Once you have finished your bath, then you can either show up at the group that you're going to have the ritual with, or you can show up to your own area where you're going to cast your own circle. Next, do a grounding and centering. Grounding helps you to relax and release tension and connect with a power source such as the earth to preserve your own energy. Centering balances the energy flowing within your body once you've grounded it. It's crucial that you ground and center before doing your magical work. You can use the meditation that I've shared with you in lesson 2, or any other method that you find that works for you. If you're with a group, many traditions include a ritual ceremony to unify the group. Often this is a meeting dance. Usually this involves some sort of anointing with oil. And if you're not in a group, you can still anoint yourself with oil. When using an essential oil, make sure that it's diluted heavily with a carrier oil to avoid skin irritation. Any vegetable oil will do. It does not need to be scented. You can just anoint your third eye point, or you can anoint all your chakra points if you prefer. Before you enter a circle, especially a group circle, there's often an aura cleansing. Now, if you're doing this on your own and you've taken your ritual bath, you can omit this step. But in a group setting, very frequently they will, after the meeting and anointing, cleanse each other with some incense and sprinkling some salt water as they enter the ritual space. But like I said, if you've taken your ritual bath and you're just doing this on your own, you don't need to cleanse your aura again. You've already done that. Next, the space that we are working in will need to be purified so that we can tune it to our purpose. This is usually done with salt and water and with incense. Each of those things are charged with our electric blue witch light, like we've used in the consecration of your tools. Frequently, what we do is we take each element and consecrate it separately. You would take some water in your chalice and set it on your pentacle, and you would bless the water. Then you would take some salt and put it directly on your pentacle and bless it. And you'd mix the salt into the water and set it aside. Then you take your thurible with hot coals and put it on the pentacle and bless it. And then you would take your incense material and put it on the pentacle and bless it. Then you would put the incense material on top of the hot coals. So you could streamline that if you didn't want to bless each thing separately. You could put the salt and water together and then bless them together, and then you could put the incense on the hot coals and bless the incense. Either way, you will start your purification at the center of your circle and walk usually clockwise in a spiral around and around the circle, getting larger and larger until you get to where the perimeter of the circle is going to be. And you'll sprinkle salt water the whole time, usually chanting some purification chant, such as salt and water where you are cast, no spell nor unknown purpose last. And I've given you these chants in your handouts already. Then you would do the same thing with your incense. Starting in the center of the circle, you'd walk around in a clockwise fashion, spiraling outward until you get to the perimeter of your circle, cleansing with incense. Now, if you don't like using incense, you could use a spray perfume or cologne if you prefer. Sometimes I'll use a thurible that's actually an oil burner. So there's a little water in the oil burner and you can put some essential oil in there, and then you can use the essential oil vapor instead of incense. Once the area is purified, we need to keep it that way, and we do that by sealing it off with an energy boundary. This boundary acts as a shield against unwanted energies and vibrations, ensuring that the power also remains contained within. It serves this dual purpose, protection and containment. The common tool for casting the circle is the athame, but a wand can also be effective, as I've already said. It's important to experiment with both and see which one suits you better in different circumstances, and only you can determine that through experience. Like I said, you could also just use your fingers, either an index finger or the index and middle finger extended together. Use your dominant hand. If you're truly ambidextrous, then use the hand that you take nourishment with, the one that you tend to eat with. That's the one that you'll use. Different traditions may have specific guidelines as to the diameter of the circle you're going to cast, while others are more flexible, allowing the circle to just fit the space or the number of participants involved. Usually, I don't care about the particular measurements, but if I'm doing a specific kind of ritual with a specific kind of power that I want to incorporate into it, I will make a knot with my cord to measure half the feet that I want my circle to be. And then I will anchor the cord at the center of where I'm going to have my circle, and I'll use the cord to measure the circle. But it's very rare that I do that. I usually just wing it, and it can be whatever size I want it to be. When you're casting your circle, it should be that electric blue witch light that we've been working with all this time. You see it either going through your fingers, through your wand, or through your athame as you're walking the perimeter. After casting your circle is finished, you want to avoid crossing its boundary to maintain its integrity. Repeatedly crossing it will weaken its power. Marking the circle's boundary on the ground can be very helpful, especially at first. For indoor practices, you can use chalk, masking tape, or salt. While in an outdoor setting, you could use sand, dirt, or pine cones to mark the boundary. Marking the boundary is not necessary, but it can definitely enhance your experience. To cast the circle, stand at the intended perimeter facing outwards, ready to begin. Start by pointing your blade, wand, or finger downward at the ground, where you tend to establish that energy boundary. Typically, you will begin in either the east or the north, depending on your tradition or depending on the type of ritual that you're working. You can start it in one of the other directions as well. Connect to the power that you grounded with during your grounding and centering, and allow that energy to surge up through your body and out through your arm via the tip of your athame wand or fingertips. As you see this energy shooting directly down onto the ground, walk around the entire perimeter of the circle. While doing so, you will chant a conjuration that's given in the handout. I conjure thee, O circle of power, that thou beest a boundary between the worlds of humans and the realms of the mighty ones, a guardian and protection that shall preserve and contain that great power I shall raise within you. You keep walking the perimeter, conjuring that circle, seeing that circle forming all around you, and then you'll finish by slightly overlapping where you started so that there's no gaps in your circle. After sealing the sacred space, everybody, if there's a group, will take a moment to visualize in their minds this circle before moving forward. Now, as I mentioned just a second ago, you can overlap the area where you began your casting. For example, if you start in the east, consider beginning in the northeast instead, and then ending in the east. Another useful technique involves drawing a figure 8 on its side, also known as a knot of infinity, symbolizing the connection of the starting and the ending strands of your circle. So that's another idea that some people will use. When they finish their circle casting, they'll draw that little knot of infinity to symbolize that they have connected the circle so that there's no gaps. I just usually overlap it. Next, we call upon the watchtowers. The watchtowers are simply the elements at each of the 4 corners of the circle. In some traditions, you're going to call upon specific deities, specific beings, specific angels. We keep everything generic in which is primer. So these are just the elemental guardians that are always there at each direction. Now, in the system that I'm teaching you here, those 4 cardinal directions relate to the 4 elements in the northern hemisphere as follows. East is associated with air, south with fire, west with water, and north with earth. In the southern hemisphere, you will swap the associations between south and north. In the southern hemisphere, your south is earth and your north is fire. To call upon the guardians, we open portals into the realms of each element. Now remember, to evoke means to summon an entity into a specific space temporarily, while invoke means to call an entity into oneself for an indefinite period as a form of worship. You want to evoke at each quarter because you want each of those quarters to stay put at the 4 directions so that each of those 4 quarters has a guardian. Each element is associated with a color, and in this system, air is yellow, fire is red, water is blue, and earth is green. You might find many, many different opinions and systems, and if you choose a different system, that's absolutely fine. But in the system I'm teaching you, air is yellow, fire is red, water is blue, and earth is green. It's a common practice to place a candle in the color of the corresponding element at the perimeter of the circle in each of the 4 directions. And if you choose to do this, just set up those candles ahead of time. In the northern hemisphere, the directional colors for the candle would be east is yellow, south is red, west is blue, north is green. In the southern hemisphere, simply swap the colors for north and south. So East is yellow, south is green, west is blue, and north is red. Lighting these candles during the evocation of each quarter signifies the presence of the watchtower of that quarter and helps you to visualize the color associated with each direction. The act of confining space during these rituals is not about trapping an entity or intimidating an entity. It's more akin to preparing a welcoming environment, similar to tidying your home before hosting a party. It's a gesture of respect to each of these elements. Evocations typically start in the east or the north, depending on where you happen to begin casting your circle. If you start in the east, begin your watchtowers in the east. If you started your circle in the north, begin your watchtowers in the north. Remember that the north and the south are always reversed in the southern hemisphere based on what I'm talking about here. Instead of the athame, which seems like a threatening instrument, I tend to personally use my wand when I'm calling on the quarters, but it's very traditional to use your athame for the quarters, and you can do that as well. During the ritual, you will hold your tool or just your hands aloft and you recite whatever recite whatever evocation you desire. I've given you an example in the handout, and then you will draw the invoking pentagram in the air with your tool, imbuing it with the color associated with that direction before lighting the candle of that quarter, if you've put a candle down in that quarter. This process is repeated for each direction moving sunwise. After calling all 4 quarters, pause for a moment for a silent salute, visualizing the pentagrams shining in each of their respective colors. So in the northern hemisphere, for instance, you would then see a shining yellow pentagram in the east, a red pentagram in the south, a blue pentagram in the west, and a green pentagram in the north. Drawing the pentagram is something that we do, but it's not necessary. You can simply call upon the quarters without any visual representation of them. If you prefer, you don't need a candle and you don't need a pentagram if you don't want one. It's effective to just do a calling of the quarters, envisioning a portal opening at each direction to each of the elemental kingdoms. If you want to use the pentagrams, in the handout, I've given you the diagram of how you can do the invoking pentagram, or you can call it the evoking pentagram, or the banishing pentagram, which is going to come when we close the portals. Now, in that handout, you have the option to circle the pentagram in the air after you've drawn it in the air. And that's another option you have. If you're going to circle it, you want to circle it clockwise for the evoking pentagram and counterclockwise for the banishing pentagram. Drawing a pentagram is traditional but not mandatory. You can simply call the quarters. Once you have finished calling the quarters, then it's time to raise power. Now, you've already raised power in the last lesson. You've learned how to raise power. Now we're going to raise power and allow it to form a cone of power that's anchored at the perimeter of the circle, with its tip usually at the full moon, at a star, at the sun, or some sort of apex that we imagine above our heads. Now, if you're in a group setting, you'll have everybody join hands and breathe and pull energy up and then start passing energy to the person, if you're in the northern hemisphere, to the person on their left, and pulling in energy from the person on their right, sharing that energy as it goes around and around the circle. And then somebody's usually directing this exercise so that you're all seeing the cone of power being raised and an apex forming at whatever the goal happens to be. But if you're on your own, you can simply raise power as we showed you how to do last lesson and see it forming that cone of power all around you, and see that energy boundary that's around you being where the base of the cone is anchored. No matter where the moon happens to be, I happen to like to see the moon directly above me and let the point of the cone or the apex of the cone rest on the moon. But sometimes if I'm doing a solar ritual, I'll have the sun be above me. Or if I'm doing a ritual to a particular planet, I'll imagine that planet is directly above me. There's a lot of ways to raise energy and raise a cone of power. And with practice, you'll get better at doing it. Just do your best and you'll do just fine. When you're calling upon a deity, this would be the time to do it after the cone is raised. Now, some people don't do deities or they don't call upon anything like that. They're completely non-religious and they like to just do their magic, and that's fine. You don't need that. But if you do like to call in a deity, like maybe you're working with a god and a goddess, or maybe you're working with the personification of one of the planets, or maybe you're working with an archangel, this might be when you would call them in. After you've called your deity, it's time to do your work. And that's usually your spell that you're going to cast. If you're in a ritual with other people, you'll probably do some sort of group magic or a group spell that you're working. Any kind of spell that you want to do inside a circle, now would be the time to do it. It might be a mental spell where you're visualizing a particular outcome, or it might be where you do your poppet, or a cord spell. You might be start to tie your knots at this point. Whatever you're doing for your spell, if you're doing it in a circle, this would be when it would be. Once you've finished with your work, that's when you do libations. If you've decided to do libations, make sure that you have a second chalice than what you've used for your salt and water, or use something else for your salt and water besides your chalice, because you don't want salty wine or salty juice. Usually this is where you would have your cakes and wine, and remember to leave some wine on the altar and a cake on the altar for your deities if you've called them. This is where you just relax and just kick back and feel the energy. It's more relaxed in a group setting as well, where you can have some conversation. Usually it's conversation that's about the ritual, not something mundane. But once you've finished with that libation time, it's time to take everything down. So you just do everything back in reverse from the way that you put it up. So you're going to start with thanking and saying farewell to any deities or angels that you've invoked, if any. Then you will take down the cone and you just simply see it melting like candle wax down. And you feel like you're grounding and centering and earthing that cone of power into the earth. Then you'll go around to each quarter and you'll thank each quarter and you'll close the quarter. If you've used a pentagram, you'll use a banishing pentagram to close the quarter. If you've circled the pentagram, you will uncircle it counterclockwise. Then you'll pick up the energy boundary. I usually go the opposite way that I've cast the circle. So if I've cast the circle clockwise, I'll go counterclockwise to uncast the circle, but you can do it both clockwise if you prefer. I just walk the perimeter of the circle, and with usually the same tool that I've cast it, I see it erasing. I see that circle boundary is becoming dispersed. Then we'll do some sort of final grounding and centering and some sort of affirmation that the circle is open. So with a group, it's usually something like, may the circle be open, yet unbroken. May the love of the God and Goddess be ever in our hearts. Merry meet and merry part and merry meet again. Or if you're just by yourself, you might just want to clap your hands together, stomp your feet, make it really clear the ritual is over, and then just clean everything up and you're done. And that's how you cast a circle. And this is, like I said, something that you don't have to do the full ritual like I've given it to you. But if you want to do the full ritual like I've given it to you and you want to get good at it, you might want to try doing it once a day or once a week and just get to where you can do this very quickly. When I was learning how to cast a circle, I would cast the whole circle. I'd meditate for a few minutes. I wouldn't necessarily do work each time because the work was me practicing the casting of the circle. And then I'd take it down. And I got to the point where I could cast a circle in 10, 15 minutes max. And you can do that as well. You can memorize the process and add your own flourishes to it and make it your own. And like I said, you don't have to do all of this. You can simply do the boundary. You can simply call upon the quarters. Try it different ways for yourself and see how it works. This is your craft, and this will be your circle as well. So you can do it as you decide to. But check out the different handouts that come with this course, and you'll see that within the main handout that I have given you an outline for this circle that I've just described for you so that you can not get lost and follow along with it. All right, thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, blessed be.